Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining today's Tea Time Talk. Really happy to have you all here today. I'm just going to go straight right into the topic and introduce our speaker today. And we'll have this recorded and available on YouTube afterwards. So it won't be restricted to just BAPO members because this is part and parcel of the NHCC workforce project. So afterwards, you can always share this with colleagues and share the links with them so you can always watch it back as well. If you have questions, comments, please use the chat function, or you can just raise your hand and I can turn your microphone on and you can speak. Right, so today's topic is embracing the research pillar of practice with the NHS England Multi-Professional Practice-Based Research Capabilities Framework. It's quite a long one, but I'm sure Joe is going to do justice to it. So I'm going to introduce today Jo Watson, who is part and parcel of the Creative Alliance, and she's leading a couple of streams of work projects. I'll just let you do your thing, Jo. All right.
Thank you so much, Krista. Thank you. Yeah, it's a name that just trips off the tongue, the name of the framework, isn't it? But before we dive into that, my name's Jo Watson. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I'm a freelance consultant. The work that I did to lead the development of this new multi-professional practice-based research capabilities framework was sort of under the umbrella of my own consultancy. But as Krista says, I'm working with my colleagues Bev Durrant and Steph Tempest as the Creative Health Alliance, and we're working alongside BAPO on a number of projects related to workforce development program that's going on over the next 12 months. So it'll be good to touch base with some of you in other areas of our work, I'm sure. But focusing today on the research capabilities framework, the aims of this session really are to introduce you to the new framework, to explore how you can work with it to support professional and career growth, and to highlight how doing that contributes to enhancing the outcomes and the experiences of the people that we work with. So as Krista says, as we go along, please feel free to add your thoughts, your impressions, questions, and what have you into the chat. And perhaps we'll pick those up a little bit later in the session. But if you've got burning questions that are really relevant to a section that we're at, do stick your hand up, and hopefully Krista can keep an eye out for those and interrupt me, and we'll pick them up as we go along. So the framework was a couple of years in the making, really. There were periods of desk-based research, drafting, engagement, redrafting, further engagement, and finally finalising the content and publishing the framework in February of this year. And during that development, we had input and feedback from national and strategic leaders in organisations such as NHS England and the National Institute for Healthcare Research, from professional bodies, including from BAPO, from the Council of Deans of Health, and from the Council of Allied Health Professions Research, and importantly, from practitioners themselves. It's intended to support health and care professions other than medicine and dentistry. And as you can see here on this list, it's a pretty large and mixed group, which presented some challenges in itself. But I guess that the motivation for developing it was really focused on that well-recognised need to transform health and care service delivery to better meet the needs and the expectations of the communities that they're intended to serve. But it's also driven by the need to make best use of the full range of staff skills and experiences so that we can better realise individual potential and create attractive career opportunities for people to pursue. So many of the system level drivers really originate with the NHS, but I'd argue that their relevance is much wider than that. And there's strong strategic alignment with many of the priorities of the AHPs collectively and of BAPO specifically. And we know that that active engagement of practitioners with and in research is really key to transforming the services that we offer and to the health and well-being of the individuals and the communities that we serve. And we manage that, or we achieve that, through ensuring that people are delivering safe evidence-based practice, through further strengthening and developing the existing evidence base, and really informing service design, clinical reasoning, and shared decision making with those that we work alongside. But we also know that practitioners can encounter a number of challenges when it comes to getting actively involved in and with research. Alongside potentially low levels of confidence, those challenges include things like practice-focused activities being prioritised at the expense of other pillars of practice, a lack of clarity about research-related activities in job descriptions, and even when it is in job descriptions, sometimes research-related activity can be missing from objectives or appraisals. And there can be limited access to an understanding of relevant developmental opportunities and to managerial support, role models and mentors. And sometimes organisational cultures of research engagement are not fully developed. So this new framework has really been published to clearly set out how practitioners can support research, participate in research, and even lead research. The ambition that the framework supports is that over time, engaging with and in research becomes every healthcare practitioner's business, and that it's embedded at an appropriate level into every practitioner's role. So to achieve all of that, the new framework essentially provides an in-depth look at the research pillar of practice. It provides stepping stones, if you like, for incremental research capability development across 4 levels of practice, as you can see here on the slide. It's intended to be a tool that can be used at several different levels. So by individual practitioners when they're planning their careers or thinking about their professional development, by service and departmental managers, for example, in job planning or when they're identifying individual staff objectives, by organisations who are looking to grow a research engaged organisational culture, and by education and training providers, for example, when they're planning pre and post registration educational content. There are some important points to be clear about before we dive into the details of the framework. And the first of those is this concept of capabilities. So capabilities really represent a step beyond competencies. Competencies tend to outline what individuals know or can do in terms of their knowledge, skills, attitude, behaviours, that sort of thing. But capabilities describe their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, to generate new knowledge and solutions in complicated situations, and to continue to develop and improve their performance. So other things to note really, the framework outlines the capabilities, the research capabilities that are considered fundamental to all practice-based health and care professionals, relevant to their level of practice. So they are those that are core to practice across all of the in-scope professions. So you might be exceeding some of these capabilities, and yay if you are, but these are the baseline expectations really. They're as accommodating as possible of the variability across all of those professions that we saw earlier are within scope of the framework. And that needs to recognise, for example, that there are different academic entry levels into professions, there are different professional structures, and there are different starting points across the professions in terms of existing levels of research engagement. It's very intentionally not focused solely on clinical academic careers or roles or practitioner academic careers or roles, although it can be used alongside academic frameworks for people who are aspiring to following those kinds of pathways. How the capabilities are applied and realised will vary for individuals at different stages of their careers, and it'll reflect their individual circumstances and contexts. So essentially, there's no single correct path to follow, but all practitioners must make carefully considered use of the existing research evidence to inform their decision making. That's written into the standards published by all of the relevant regulators, including the HCPC. Beyond that, the emphasis might be on supporting research, on delivering or leading research, and all of those possibilities contribute to our collective efforts to transform services. They also all contribute to supporting staff recruitment, retention, engagement, and development through supporting the growth and emergence of a wide range of different career opportunities and pathways for practitioners to consider. We know that support workers, technicians, assistants, associate practitioners, and pre-registration learners all make valuable contributions in the research pillar. But this first edition of the framework doesn't actually include those working at these levels of practice. Having said that, in the context of the very highly skilled technicians that are often working within the field of prosthetics and orthotics, there is absolutely no reason why the capabilities couldn't be referred to by this really important segment of the P&O workforce. Equally, while pre-reg learners are not explicitly included, education providers might want to think about how the entry-level capabilities might be used to inform their pre-reg educational curricular content in relation to research capabilities. So let's have a look at the structure of the framework. As we touched on earlier, it's built around 4 levels of practice. So the expectations at entry level are based on the standards of practice or proficiency that are published by the regulatory bodies. These are always applicable to us while we're on the register, so they're a logical starting point at the outset of practitioners' careers. Enhanced level practice includes those who've progressed beyond that threshold regulatory requirement to practicing at a level that comes before, precedes advanced practice. So the expectations there are guided by the Enhanced Clinical Practitioner Apprenticeship Standard published by the Institute for Apprenticeships, and by the principles of enhanced level practice that were developed by Alison Leary in 2022. As you can imagine, the logical reference point for advanced level practice is the research pillar of the Health Education England Multi-Professional Framework for Advanced Practice. And similarly, at consultant level, it's the research pillar of the Multi-Professional Consultant Level Practice Capability Framework. So the Research Capabilities Framework presents a set of 8 non-hierarchical and interrelated domains, each of which identify a number of capabilities. So the domains and their capabilities very much need to be interpreted in the context of an individual practitioner's role, in the context of their employment situation, and the professional and the regulatory standards that are applying to them. That means that how they are applied and how they're demonstrated will vary from individual to individual. As we said before, there's no one size fits all. There's no one correct way to do things. And it's worth noting that the capabilities that are presented at each successive level of practice incorporate and extend those that came before it. And it's in that way that we can provide that sort of incremental stepping stone approach to supporting the development across those 4 levels of practice. So it's not going to be sensible to try and go through all of the domains or the capabilities today. So what we're going to do is have a look at some illustrative examples to give you a little bit of a flavour of what it looks like. To begin with, this slide shows how the capabilities are presented in each of the domains, although I appreciate you're probably going to struggle to read some of the details here. The focus of Domain 1, research-related career growth, is on a proactive approach to research-related capabilities development. So essentially it provides that foundation for consistently embedding research into the day-to-day practice of all health and care practitioners. And just to reassure you, this slide captures the full set of capabilities within Domain 1. So here are each of the different, I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, I hope you can, each of the different, oh, I might need to be over here, each of the different levels of practice. And you can see how across the levels of practice, the expectations increase steadily as you go along. Okay, so let's turn to some more specific examples from across the 4 levels of practice and how you might interpret them and work with them. The key thing to remember here are these are illustrative examples, okay? That's all. They're not instructions and they're not the only way that you can demonstrate fulfillment of these capabilities. So if you've got more ideas, please feel free to share them with other people in the chat. So first of all, we're looking at entry level of practice, and we are in the planning and designing research domain. So capability 3 in this domain expects practitioners to undertake basic systematic information searches using appropriate tools and databases to identify information and evidence relevant to answering their practice-based inquiries. Okay, so if we look at some of these illustrative examples of what that means in practice, I'm hopeful that it will reassure you that you do this, you know how to do this stuff. It's not introducing a whole lot of new expectations. So when you come across a practice-focused issue that you're not quite sure what to do with, first port of call is likely to be having a look at what the available evidence tells you. So you're going to draw on all of those literature searching skills that you developed during your pre-reg studies. You might feel like you need to give them a little bit of a polish, but that's okay. You're going to make a list of the sorts of keywords that you need to search under. You're going to think about how you combine those keywords to make sure that you narrow down a potentially vast array of information to the results that really focus on your area of interest. You're going to use the library resources that are available to you, either through your organisation, through an NHS library, perhaps through your professional body, whatever sources are available to you, and do a search to gather together some of that up-to-date evidence. Bit of careful weeding is required to get rid of all of those duplicates and those that are obviously not within the area that you're looking for. You're going to narrow that down and select the most likely candidates to search out and read. And you're probably going to use one of the critiquing tools, or you might use one of the critiquing tools that are available to help you really focus in on what's good and what's strong about the way that this study has been conducted, which will help you to decide what you do with what you've learnt from it. And you're probably going to discuss that with your colleagues and help to ask them to help you think about how and if and how you can safely apply that information into your practice. So that probably is something that is not unfamiliar to you at all, and hopefully hasn't made you feel like, oh, crikey. So let's have a look at enhanced level practice. So that's the next level of practice up. And this time we're looking at the research delivery domain. And capability 3 here requires practitioners to contribute to the delivery of research projects or clinical trials being undertaken in their own service, department, or organisation. So remember, this is one of a range of capabilities within enhanced practice. And it's one of a range of capabilities within Domain 3 research delivery. And there's a degree of overlap between them. They're not mutually exclusive, the different capabilities. So in this instance, you're going to need to understand about research ethics and governance processes, and you'll already be drawing on all of your knowledge about data protection and confidentiality requirements, because that's all fundamental to your practice anyway. You're going to keep yourself aware of what projects are going on in the department around you. You're maybe going to let people know that you're interested in supporting and learning alongside the delivery of some of these projects, so that you can contribute to the project, but you can also learn something en route. And that might be through things such as supporting the recruitment of participants, or screening for eligibility, collecting some of the baseline data. Let people know that you're interested. That's an important thing, and explore what possibilities emerge. You might need to do a little bit of training to make sure that you can fulfill the requirements that are being asked of you, and you're going to work actively and positively alongside the rest of the team. And if you get a chance, contribute to the final report. Why not? That's a fabulous learning opportunity as well. And as always, in all aspects of our CPD, just take a moment to reflect on what you've learnt through that, and make sure that you carry that learning forward into the next occasion. So you don't have to dive straight into running your own research trial. You can just contribute to a small piece of somebody else's project and make a really meaningful difference to that. Okay, let's have a look at something in advanced level practice. And this time we're looking at the knowledge mobilization and research implementation domain. And in this domain, at advanced level, capability 4 reads, effectively communicate the relevance of research findings and best practice to colleagues, advocacy groups, and wider communities. And here, what you're really potentially, one way of demonstrating this is drawing upon your awareness of the existing and the emerging research evidence that is relevant to your area of practice, and you're putting that together with your growing understanding of what good research methodology looks like. And then you're going to be drawing upon your well-developed communication skills, and putting all of those things together so that you can present information in an accessible, appropriately targeted way to different audiences, so that you can support them to understand how research and best practice really helps to shape and improve the way that services are planned and delivered. One more example. This time, as you can bet, in relation to consultant level practice. And this time we are looking at domain 6, which is supporting research related development in others. And within that domain, capability 6 asks that practitioners proactively and equitably support and facilitate research-related career development in others. So this is about bringing people along with you. We're all developing all the time, but it's really great to look out for people who are following in our footsteps and sharing our learning with those folks to help them in their own career development journeys. So at this stage, we're looking at consultant level practice. So we're talking about people who can use their role and influence to promote and role model anti-racist, anti-discriminatory practices and allyship, and really work proactively towards facilitating equitable access to research-related opportunities and career progression. We know that's a big issue that needs to be addressed across all of the health and care professions, and much wider than that, obviously. You might be working to inspire people's curiosity, to build their enthusiasm, to build their confidence a bit, and get them to engage in small ways in all sorts of research-related inquiry at a level that is appropriate to them. And you might be working to embed that organisational culture that values and enables engagement in and with research and quality improvement initiatives, and actually does that in a really consciously equitable way. So this is really about inspiring others to follow in your footsteps, given that you're in a consultant level role at this stage. You might be supervising research projects. You might be keeping an eye on the research that is being undertaken by those in your department who are less experienced than you, and you might be contributing to the local development of new and exciting research development structures and pathways. So there's a whole range of different ways that you might be able to demonstrate achieving that kind of a capability. So one of the things that I'd really like to emphasize is that is really the framework is another tool amongst many in the toolbox supporting your career growth and development. It's not another hoop to jump through. It's something that's there to support and help the development of in this particular pillar of practice. So if you're familiar with the growth-based career planning approach that's supported by Health Education England, it's one of your driftwood assets. If you're not familiar with the growth-based career planning model, you'll be wondering what I'm talking about driftwood, but it is really useful. So you might want to check that out. There's the if you just Google growth-based career planning, you will come up with some really useful resources there. As we've seen, the research capabilities framework really provides that much more detailed exploration of the research pillar than is typically available in other frameworks. But you can use it alongside those other frameworks. So, for example, if you're interested in preparing yourself or a member of your team for an advanced practice role, you're probably already working with the BAPO career development framework and with the advanced practice guidance from Health Education England, and you're likely to be using that so that you know precisely what the goalposts are or the threshold expectations are of advanced level practice nationally. But you've also got the BAPO advanced practice guidance, which will be enormously helpful to consult. And if you know that the research pillar is an area that you need to pay a little bit more attention to, then you can use the research capabilities framework to help you break down the skills and capabilities that you need to be developing into steps so that you can grow in that area. As I said, it's not another hoop for you to jump through, but it is there to support the development of individuals, of teams, of services, and of organisations. I'd like to think that we're all reasonably familiar with the 4 pillars of practice. So clinical and technical practice. I've got professional there, but it's technical in your context, isn't it, for P&O? Leadership, facilitation of learning, and evidence, research and development. And I think, as the name 4 pillars of practice suggests, each is really fundamental to practice. It's a fundamental component of the practice that we deliver on a daily basis. They won't necessarily all be developed to the same extent, these 4 pillars, but each of us needs to be able to demonstrate engagement to a greater or lesser extent with all of them. That's reflected in the HCPC and the BAPO standards and in the BAPO career development framework. Being able to look more closely at each pillar individually is, I think, really helpful in terms of guiding development and growth, and that's precisely what the framework is intended to do. Just as a sort of a final thought, I'd like to propose that the pillars aren't really separate and distinct. I struggle a bit with the concept of the 4 pillars because they sound very isolated. And one of the images that I prefer is the analogy of a rope, and I guess that reflects the principle that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So all 4 pillars if you like, as a starting point, are core to practice, and all four are interrelated. So for me, I actually prefer to think of them as woven together. They're strongest when they're woven together. So it's a bit like thinking about strands woven together into a stronger rope, or strands of cord woven together into a stronger rope. If we think of the four pillars as four strands of practice instead, and think about how they all come together to enable us to deliver really high quality, safe and effective practice, I think that's a useful thing. And I also honestly believe that it helps to build satisfying and fulfilling career options, pathways, and individual careers as well, when they're all woven together. No one's suggesting that we all need to go on to lead multi-centre, multi-million-pound randomised control trials, but we all do need to engage in and with research at a level that's appropriate to our career level. And I really think that the career capabilities framework is a really helpful way of helping to achieve that. So, Krista, I think that brings us to any questions and discussion opportunities. So shall I stop sharing?
Yes, that's okay. Thank you so much, Joe. That was wonderful. I really love the illustration of the rope instead of the four pillars. I think
Yeah.
that's really good imagery there.
So have we got any comments in the chat at all? No. Has anybody got any queries or comments or observations?
All right, Joe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Okay, right. We have Paul. I'll just let you speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we got you, Paul.
Yes.
Hi, thanks. I do apologise. I missed your introduction. I was having technical challenges. Sorry, Joe. What's your background? Are you dealing with all the AHPs? Yeah.
My professional background is as an occupational therapist,
Okay.
but this framework was developed to support practice-based research engagement across a wide group of people, Paul. So it's health and care professions other than medicine and dentistry, really, which is quite a range of folk.
Yeah. I'm very fortunate. I'm well on in my career. I've been doing it a long time, and I've managed to get involved in all kinds of things. But I see real challenges for the younger folk coming into their careers. I don't know if you're aware. I mean, I just do orthotics, and there's probably about 600-700 orthotists practicing in the UK. So we're all quite isolated, and the opportunity to get involved in research on orthotics, there isn't a lot happening, to be honest. So exposure is a real tricky one.
Yeah.
So have you got any tips for how to handle that?
I think that is feedback that I get from a lot of different professions. And I think, Paul, the truth is that we have to start where we are, and we have to do what we can with what we've got, basically. And it does take time. I also think that it's worth thinking in a multidisciplinary context.
Yeah.
It's tempting sometimes to think, well, I want to do, in this case, research about orthotics, so I'm going to stick with other orthotists. But there are obviously opportunities to work in collaboration with podiatrists, potentially with physiotherapists, with people who have really deep expertise in biomechanics and all that kind of thing outside those professions. So I think sometimes expanding the pool of opportunities by thinking about who else might be interested in this, who else has got something on, can help to identify other opportunities. And I think as a collective, trying to work together, probably with BAPO over time, to really bring together a bit of a community of people who are research interested, who can start to grow and create opportunities and link with each other over time, will pay some dividends. I think it's important to say this is a long-term game, isn't it? This is not something that's going to be sorted within the next 12 months or so. This is really setting out a pathway for something that we all need to, work towards achieving fully, probably a decent way down the line.
Yeah, thanks for that. There's two challenges really. I appreciate what you're saying, and I've done it myself. I've linked with multidisciplinary teams, but there tends to be projects which are set by the other disciplines, so you end up not really doing orthotics and doing other things. And the challenge we have in P&O is we really need to increase our evidence base.
Yeah.
So we do need orthotic and prosthetic projects to be researched. So I'm a little bit wary of setting off on multidisciplinary teams. That'll take them away from our profession a little bit.
I think it doesn't have to be. I don't think it has to be all one or the other. I don't think it's all or nothing. And sometimes there is a bit of investing to be done in building a team and developing skills and capabilities, and those things aren't necessarily happening together. So developing your skills and capabilities is one thing. Building a team is another thing. But I do think, as I said, we have to start somewhere. We can either stay where we are with the status quo, which is, it's quite difficult, and I don't deny that it's difficult, because it's difficult across many of the professions, but we have to make a start with where we are and then try to move incrementally towards developing that program of research. Find out who else is doing research in that area and hook in with them as best you can. But we have to start from somewhere.
Yeah, thanks. I'm making lots of starts and I'm doing lots of things myself. But as I say, it's others I'm concerned for.
We're going to be pointing people towards you, Paul, then.
Well, interestingly, that's what I want, because I am looking at trying to get some funding to do some big research projects. But I'm already thinking of where am I going to get the researchers from, because the challenges in the project I'm looking at, there's lots of physiotherapists involved, and they want to do it, but I don't want them to do it. I want an orthotist to do it. So the challenge I have then is I'm aware that as orthotists, as they graduate, they really get flung in at the deep end and just getting to grips with the clinical practice, which is what their bread and butter is a big thing. And I don't think it's fair to really push them when they first come out. So I reckon they need a couple of years clinical practice to really delve into the research properly, is my thought.
Well, I think there are a couple of schools of thought there. One is, let people settle in and do their clinical practice, i.e., let's ignore the other three pillars of practice and just focus on one pillar of practice, which is kind of where we've been for a long time. And I think that's true across a number of disciplines, most disciplines. The challenge there is that if you're not using the skills and the knowledge that you've used for a few years, it's very, very easy to lose confidence in them and then think, I'll just keep doing this, and I don't really want to go back into that space where I'm not so sure. So there's pros and cons of each. But I think, as I said at the end, I think that weaving together and recognizing that research is not one thing, which is something that we tend to think, oh, it just looks like this. But if you have a look at the content of the capabilities, you'll see that there are opportunities for people to grow very much tied into their day-to-day clinical practice.
There aren't. So sorry, that was very blunt. The challenge is the way, certainly in England, the way orthotics is set up. Getting time and resource to enter into research is a real challenge.
It is. And I can tell you that as part of the work that the Creative Health Alliance is doing, or the program of work that the Creative Health Alliance is contributing to with BAPO this year, there is a strand of work being led by somebody else, which is very much focused on looking at the commissioning of services and the contracting of services and trying to evolve the way that that's done so that it takes much more account of the different contributions to a good quality service, including education, time for CPD, supporting practice-based learning of the new workforce and so on. So I'm not suggesting for a second that any of this is simple, but we have to make a start and we have to chip away at things and do what we can to move forward gradually over time. As I say, this is a long game. This isn't one that's going to be sorted by the end of the year or even, necessarily the end of the decade, but we have to make a start on it.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to resonate with that point that's just been made, Joe has said one of the issues is that we often work on a subcontract basis to the NHS. Contractors employ the minimum number of clinicians and they can win a competitive tender contract. Ideally, there should be a requirement for research within the tender to encourage research.
Totally agree with you, Joe. And as I said, there is work going on to also explicitly look at including CPD time for people, particularly new graduates who just need a little bit of headspace to get themselves through that transition period from pre-registration learner into qualified practitioner, to support, as we mentioned just a moment ago, the pre-registration education of students who are ongoing and research. And that's a big nut to crack, because the way that your contracting has evolved over time has not necessarily been to every certainly has not necessarily been to practitioners' advantage, but I would argue it is not necessarily in the long run supportive of quality services that the NHS wants to commission. If there are issues with retention and development and that sort of thing, that can't be helping with that kind of ongoing improvement of service delivery. So something needs to change. I mean, there's a number of things that need to change. And as we said, that that's not going to happen overnight, but totally agree that the way that things are contracted needs to be reconsidered for everyone's advantage.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask for an entry-level practitioner who has the resources, has the environment that encourages
ideal
research,
situation.
the ideal situation. What would be your first thoughts? What would you do? For example, we've just had this whole job planning thing where you write down where you need to improve. And one of the things I try to do within mine is try to point out the 4 different areas of practice and see how I can build on each of those. So how would I incorporate research in that regard? Do I go through an audit route or do I collaborate with others? What practical steps?
I would suggest that that it might be useful to bring a group of people together who are at a similar level and to sit down with coffee and cake, ideally, that's my preferred choice, and look through the enhanced level expectations across the 8 domains. So if we're talking about new graduates, is that what you said, Krista? Yeah, but anybody could do this, same approach. It doesn't matter which level you're on. And maybe think about RAG rating it. So I might look at, capability 1 in domain 1 and go, nailed it, green. And then I might look at capability 2 in domain 1 and go, got to give that one an orange. And I might look at another one and go, oh, I've got no idea what's going on there, or I don't know how to do that, or I haven't done that. And I might flag that one as red. Okay. What is interesting is if you do that amongst a group of people who know each other, who work alongside each other, who have a sense of where everybody's at, you might say to me, oh, I think you're being a bit harsh on yourself there, Joe. I actually think you do that. I think that's green. Alternatively, you might say, oh, I think you're being a bit generous, Joe. You might want to grade that as an orange. So you've got that kind of sense checking within a safe environment of people who know you. And then potentially, if you think, okay, well, these ones are all green, that's happy days. I'm good on those. I know what I'm doing. My next target would be some of the oranges. And I'd be thinking, which of those oranges do I really want to focus a little bit of attention on? And then look at what sort of developmental opportunities might be available for me, whether that's formal educational training, whether that's informal CPD, whether it's just focusing a bit more attention on it yourself and trying to develop those skills. I would kind of pick maybe two or three of those, focus on those, and then go back after a time and do your RAG rating again, and then see which ones come to the surface this time, which have moved into green, which have moved into orange from red before, which you might find is happening without you even consciously thinking about it, and which are the priority orange ones that you might be thinking about next. And if you get the opportunity, if it's realistic, having a discussion with your line manager about what the opportunities might be is a useful thing to do as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really do like that idea of not just trying to just do everything, but actually finding out where exactly am I on this scale and capabilities. Yeah. Brilliant. Any more questions? Comments? I know Joe was typing earlier, but it didn't drop. Oh, he's still typing. Okay.
I think the thing is, in my experience, I think confidence can be a huge, huge barrier. And I think that the way that people understand research can also be a significant barrier. People can think that the research is one thing. It's that multidisciplinary, multi-centre, multi-million pound RCT, randomized control study. And it's not necessarily, it's a lot of different things. And nobody on earth ever started doing research at that level. You know, nobody was born a professor. That didn't happen to anybody ever. Everybody started as a beginner, and everybody had to learn the skills in just the same way as we all learnt the fundamental core skills of our base profession, that I learnt to be an occupational therapist, that you all learnt how to be prosthetists and or orthotists. So everybody has to start at the beginning. So there's something about not expecting yourself to go from a standing start to the fully polished research leader, that there is a development to be undertaken, and it does take time. Sorry, I'm just looking at Joe's comment here. McCall was made a laud for his report. We got a prosthetic service with competitive tendering that seems to have led to a spiral to the bottom rather than looking for the key performance indicators. We need a way of including research in the contracting system. Yeah, as we said, Joe, totally agree. And I think that requires a number of discussions at a number of different levels. And BAPO is obviously the organisation that is going to be leading that across the profession. And indeed, that, some of that work is ongoing at the moment. And in my experience, these things need a lot of talking about at a lot of different levels, so that we plant a lot of seeds and build a certain momentum behind it to make the difference over time. And it doesn't happen quickly, sadly. I'd love it if it did, but it rarely does. The best thing that can happen is all services are integrated to the NHS. Well, I don't know enough about the way that your services are contracted to comment on that, but I'm sure that there's a lot of consideration of the different options one way and another. But it's a challenging area. I don't underestimate how challenging.
Joe, one of the other questions I was going to ask is, within the sets of projects that we have ongoing, are there any areas that if people were interested in developing research further, where might they be able to contribute?
Sorry, Krista, in relation to the ongoing work?
Yes. in terms of research?
In terms of research specifically, oh golly, Krista, that's a really good question. I think that it will be interesting to think about how the research pillar actually gets embodied within preceptorship. So within that support, that transition support from new graduate into confident, capable, entry-level practitioner. I would like to see the research pillar, explicitly included within there at a level that is appropriate, within the limits of the time and the resources that are available. And I think that it's already built into your career development framework, isn't it? And curriculum guidance perhaps needs a little bit of thinking about as well in terms of pre-registration education guidance that the organisation gives to the education providers. So we've got a side conversation going on here about Scotland and Wales are all in-house services. Not yet for Wales. Okay, so it's very variable the way that services are delivered. That's obviously a very big nut to crack and beyond the scope of the research capabilities framework, I'm afraid.
I think Paul has a final comment, and we'll take Paul's
sure.
just before we round up this evening.
Thanks, Christopher. Just as a comment, if there's two issues, I think you're right. There's confidence, but to be honest, I've come across some very confident graduates who lack the opportunity.
Yeah.
And for those, what I'm doing is I'm encouraging them to look at the NIHR development for clinical academics.
Absolutely, Paul.
Because they've got some quite good sponsorship for even just doing master's level. And if you can secure funding, doesn't matter who employs you, whether it's NHS or private company, if you can get funding to release you for a couple of days, then that makes you autonomous and able to do that. And I can't help thinking some of the services we work with would really be supportive of that. So that's how I'm tackling it anyway.
It's such a fantastic route to go, Paul. I really applaud that. It is nationally competitive funding, so it's not an easy option, it has to be said, but it is the range of opportunities that are coming out of NIHR for AHP specifically is growing. So we had an AHP research summit a couple of years, about 18 months ago now, I suppose, and out of that came a number of recommendations that went to the Department of Health. And many of those were funded, and that has given the NIHR an opportunity to expand the range of funding opportunities that it makes available. And it's also changing the way that it structures its support systems to try to make them a little less impenetrable, because some of them are a bit tricky to try and find your way around. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for AHPs, including prosthetists and orthotists, opening up and expanding in the coming months and years.
Right. I think that is probably all for the evening. Yeah, I guess that is it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Thank you, Paul, for your comments, questions. I think it was a really interactive session today. And I think that's what makes it great as well. Thank you, Joe, for this presentation. And like I said, the recording will be made available on YouTube for anyone who wants to go through the slides once more. With that said, Joe, do you have any last words?
No, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I hope it was useful, and do check out the research capabilities framework. I think it's a useful one to just look at and think about how it might be useful in whatever context you're working within.
Thank you so much, Joe. And good night, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.